Get out of my car. Now. You're embarrassing me." Those words from my own son cut deeper than any insult I'd ever received from a stranger. I was standing on a busy San Francisco street, watching my 28-year-old son Kevin drive away in his BMW, leaving me stranded because my appearance wasn't good enough for his tech company colleagues. 3 weeks later, I pulled up to his office building in a $200,000 Mercedes AMG that made his car look like a child's toy, and what happened next changed our relationship forever. Hi, I'm Linda Thompson, and this is the story of how my son learned the most expensive lesson of his life about judging people by their appearance. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, if you've ever had someone you love treat you like you're beneath them, or if you've ever wondered what it feels like to have the last laugh, then you need to hear what happened next, because sometimes the people who look the most ordinary are hiding the most extraordinary secrets. Let me tell you about the double life I've been living for the past 3 years. My name is Linda Thompson. I'm 52 years old, and to anyone who looks at me, I appear to be exactly what you'd expect from a single mother living in Oakland, California. I drive a 2010 Honda Civic with a small dent in the rear bumper. I shop at Target and Walmart for my clothes. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood where the rent is $1,800 a month. I work as a freelance bookkeeper for small businesses, handling their taxes and financial records for modest fees. But here's what nobody knows. Not even my own son. I'm worth over $8 million. For the past 3 years, I've been quietly building one of the most successful cryptocurrency and stock trading portfolios on the West Coast. What started as a desperate attempt to make ends meet during the 2020 pandemic has turned into a financial empire that generates more money in a month than most people make in a year. But I've been living like I'm still struggling, and there's a very specific reason for that choice. My son Kevin Thompson is 28 years old, and he works as a software engineer at TechFlow Solutions, one of San Francisco's fastest-growing startups. Kevin makes $150,000 a year, which is excellent money, especially for someone his age. But somewhere along the way, that success went to his head in ways that broke my heart to watch. Kevin used to be my pride and joy. When he was growing up, we were a team. His father left when Kevin was just 8 years old, and from that moment on, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked 3 jobs to put Kevin through college, including a computer science degree from UC Berkeley that cost me every penny I had saved and more. I was so proud when he landed his first tech job, so excited to see him building the kind of career I never had the opportunity to pursue. But success changed Kevin in ways I didn't expect. The more money he made, the more he seemed to look down on the life we'd come from. He started making comments about my old car and my outdated clothes. He'd suggest that I invest in myself and upgrade my lifestyle now that he was doing well. What Kevin didn't understand was that I could afford to upgrade. I just chose not to. The transformation became more dramatic when Kevin started dating Jessica Martinez, a 26-year-old marketing executive who works for a luxury brand consulting firm. Jessica is beautiful, polished, and completely obsessed with status symbols. She drives a white Tesla Model S, carries designer handbags that cost more than most people's rent, and has very specific ideas about what success should look like. Jessica's influence on Kevin was immediate and troubling. Suddenly, my son, who used to be proud of our humble beginnings, was embarrassed by them. He stopped inviting me to company events. He'd make excuses when his colleagues asked about his family. He started treating me like a liability rather than the mother who'd sacrificed everything to help him succeed. The painful irony was that while Kevin was becoming obsessed with appearances and status, I was quietly accumulating more wealth than he'd probably see in his entire career. But I was doing it invisibly, deliberately maintaining the modest lifestyle that had shaped both of our characters. My decision to live modestly despite my wealth wasn't about being cheap or afraid to spend money. It was about staying connected to my values and testing the people around me. I wanted to see who would value Linda Thompson the person, not Linda Thompson the millionaire. Unfortunately, that test revealed some uncomfortable truths about my own son. Kevin's friend circle had also changed dramatically. His new colleagues at TechFlow were young, ambitious, and often from privileged backgrounds. Many of them had never struggled financially, never worried about rent, never worked multiple jobs just to survive. They spoke casually about expensive vacations, luxury cars, and investment properties like these things were basic necessities rather than incredible privileges. In this environment, Kevin began to see his own background as something to overcome rather than something to be proud of. He started telling people that his mother was in finance rather than admitting I was a freelance bookkeeper. He'd dodge questions about his childhood or change the subject when colleagues talked about family backgrounds. The most painful part was watching Kevin develop an attitude of superiority toward people in service jobs, the same kinds of jobs I'd worked to support him through college. He'd be impatient with restaurant servers, dismissive of retail workers, and condescending toward anyone he perceived as being beneath his current station in life. I tried talking to Kevin about these changes, but those conversations never went well. He'd get defensive and accuse me of not understanding his world or not appreciating his success. "Mom, you don't get it," he'd say. "In tech, image matters. People judge you based on what you drive, how you dress, who you associate with. I can't afford to look unsuccessful." What Kevin didn't realize was that his mother understood success better than he could imagine. While he was focused on the appearance of wealth, I was focused on building actual wealth. While he was worried about what his BMW said about his status, I was making investment decisions that could buy dozens of BMWs without thinking twice. My cryptocurrency portfolio alone was worth over $5 million, built through careful research, strategic timing, and the kind of disciplined investing that comes from truly understanding the value of money. My stock holdings included positions in companies that Kevin's colleagues could only dream of affording. My real estate investments generated passive income that exceeded Kevin's annual salary, but I kept all of this hidden because I wanted to see if success would humble my son or corrupt him. Unfortunately, I was getting my answer, and it wasn't the one I'd hoped for. The breaking point had been building for months, but the specific incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in downtown San Francisco. Kevin had reluctantly agreed to give me a ride to a doctor's appointment, though he'd made it clear that this was an inconvenience for him. I was wearing my usual outfit, comfortable jeans, a simple sweater, and practical shoes, because I'd been working from home all morning managing my investment portfolio. Kevin was dressed in his typical tech uniform of expensive jeans, a designer polo shirt, and the kind of sneakers that cost more than some people's monthly grocery budget. As we approached his office building, Kevin started getting visibly nervous. "Mom, some of my colleagues might be around. Just try to act normal, okay?" "What do you mean, act normal?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I mean, don't mention that you're a bookkeeper or talk about money troubles or anything like that. These people don't need to know our business." "Our business. as if my carefully curated modest lifestyle was something shameful rather than a deliberate choice, as if the struggles that had shaped both of our characters were something to be ashamed of rather than proud of. But I agreed to his request because I loved my son, and I wanted to support him, even when his behavior disappointed me. I had no idea that within the next hour Kevin would say something so hurtful and revealing that it would force me to finally show him exactly who his mother really was. This is the story of what happens when success makes you forget where you came from, when image becomes more important than character, and when you underestimate someone based on their appearance. It's the story of how my son learned that real wealth isn't about what you drive or what you wear. It's about what you've built when nobody's watching. And it's the story of how sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is to simply let your success speak for itself. The morning that would change everything between my son and me started like any other Tuesday in my modest Oakland apartment. I was sitting at my small kitchen table with my laptop open, coffee growing cold beside me as I monitored my cryptocurrency holdings and reviewed the stock market's pre-opening activity. By 8 a.m., I had already made 3 trades that would net me more profit than most people make in a month, but to any neighbor looking through my window, I would have appeared to be just another middle-aged woman checking email. My apartment perfectly reflected the carefully constructed image I had been maintaining for 3 years. The furniture was clean but inexpensive, a couch from IKEA, a dining table from a second-hand store, a television that was functional but certainly not impressive. The walls were decorated with family photos and a few pieces of art I'd bought at local craft fairs. Everything was neat and comfortable, but nothing suggested wealth or luxury. The only hint of my real financial situation was hidden in plain sight. My laptop was a high-end MacBook Pro that I'd bought for its processing power and security features, essential tools for serious trading. But even that I'd covered with stickers and kept in a worn laptop bag so it wouldn't stand out as expensive. Living this double life had become second nature to me. But it hadn't started as a deliberate deception. 3 years ago, I really was struggling. Kevin had just graduated from UC Berkeley with his computer science degree, and I was drowning in the debt I'd accumulated to pay for his education. I was working as a freelance bookkeeper, barely making ends meet, when the pandemic hit, and even that modest income became uncertain. That's when I discovered cryptocurrency. I started with just $500, literally all the money I could spare at the time, and began learning everything I could about digital currencies, blockchain technology, and market analysis. I spent 16 hours a day reading white papers, following market trends, and slowly, carefully, building my knowledge. My first big win came with Ethereum when it was still under $200. I'd done weeks of research and used my bookkeeping skills to analyze the fundamentals, and something about the technology and its potential applications convinced me to invest heavily. When Ethereum hit $4,000, that initial investment had grown into 6 figures. But instead of celebrating or changing my lifestyle, I reinvested almost everything and kept studying. I added traditional stocks to my portfolio, focusing on tech companies and emerging markets that my accounting background helped me understand. I learned about options trading, currency futures, and real estate investment trusts. Within 2 years, my modest apartment had become the headquarters of a multi-million-dollar financial operation that generated more passive income than Kevin's tech salary. But I told no one, not even Kevin, about my success. The decision to hide my wealth from my son was complex and deeply personal. I had watched Kevin's personality change as his own income increased, and I wanted to see how he would treat me if he believed I was still the struggling single mother who had raised him. I wanted to know if his love and respect were conditional on my economic status. Kevin's transformation had been gradual, but unmistakable. The young man who had once proudly brought friends home to our small apartment, who had bragged about his mother's work ethic and sacrifice, had slowly become someone who seemed embarrassed by his own background. His job at TechFlow Solutions had accelerated this change. The company was located in the heart of San Francisco's Soma district, in a gleaming office building surrounded by startups, venture capital firms, and the kind of restaurants where a single meal cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week. Kevin's colleagues were mostly young, well-educated, and from upper-middle-class backgrounds that had never required the kind of financial struggles that had defined our lives. In this environment, Kevin began to see our story not as an inspiring example of resilience and determination, but as something that marked him as different from his peers. He started referring to his childhood as complicated, and would change the subject when colleagues asked about his family background. The most painful change was in how Kevin treated service workers and anyone he perceived as being in a lower economic class. I had raised him to be respectful and kind to everyone, regardless of their job or social status. But success had made him impatient with restaurant servers, dismissive of retail workers, and condescending toward anyone whose work he considered unskilled. During our monthly lunch meetings, I would watch him interact with waitstaff with a casual arrogance that broke my heart. He would snap his fingers to get attention, speak in a tone that suggested their time was less valuable than his, and tip minimally while complaining about service. This wasn't the boy I had raised, and it certainly wasn't behavior that honored the struggles we had overcome together. Kevin's girlfriend, Jessica, had only amplified these troubling changes. Jessica worked for Lux Brand Consulting, a firm that helped high-end companies develop marketing strategies for wealthy consumers. Her job had given her strong opinions about status symbols, brand recognition, and the importance of projecting success. Jessica drove a white Tesla Model S that she'd bought with a combination of her salary and family money. She carried a different designer handbag every week, wore clothes that cost more than I used to make in a month, and spoke constantly about the importance of investing in your image. Her Instagram feed was a carefully curated collection of expensive restaurants, luxury shopping trips, and vacation destinations that suggested a lifestyle far beyond what her actual income could support. Under Jessica's influence, Kevin had become increasingly focused on appearances and status markers. He'd traded in his reliable Honda Accord for a BMW 3 Series that stretched his budget but made him feel more successful. He'd upgraded his wardrobe with designer brands that he claimed were investment pieces. He'd moved from his modest apartment to a trendy loft in the Mission District that cost him nearly half his monthly income. But the most troubling change was how Kevin had begun to treat me. Our monthly lunch meetings, which had once been highlights of both our schedules, became exercises in his subtle attempts to improve my appearance and lifestyle. "Mom, you should really think about getting a newer car," he'd say, glancing disapprovingly at my Honda Civic in the restaurant parking lot. "I could help you with a down payment if money's tight." "You'd look so much younger if you updated your wardrobe," Jessica would add helpfully. "There are some great affordable options at Nordstrom Rack. I could take you shopping sometime." These suggestions always came with the implication that my current choices were somehow deficient, that I was failing to live up to my potential because I wasn't spending money on status symbols. What they didn't understand was that I could afford to shop at Nordstrom's main store, not just the discount outlet, but I chose not to because I didn't need expensive clothes to feel valuable. Kevin's comments about my lifestyle became more frequent and more pointed over time. He'd suggest that I invest in myself by taking online courses, getting professional headshots, or upgrading my home office setup. He'd offer to help me establish a more professional image that would attract higher-paying clients. "Mom, you're talented and hard-working, but in today's economy, presentation matters," he'd explain, with the condescending patience of someone who believed he understood the world better than I did. "People judge you in the first 30 seconds of meeting you. If you want to grow your business, you need to look more successful." The irony was devastating. My son, who was spending beyond his means to create an illusion of success, was lecturing me about financial growth while I was sitting on an investment portfolio that generated more profit in a week than he made in a year. But I said nothing, because I wanted to see how far this behavior would go. I wanted to understand if Kevin's new values were permanent, or if they were just a phase that would pass as he matured. I hoped that eventually he would remember the lessons about character and integrity that I had tried to teach him. My daily routine had become a perfect example of this double life I was living. I would wake up at 5 a.m. to trade on international markets, making investment decisions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, while wearing pajamas and drinking coffee from a mug I'd bought at a thrift store. I would spend the morning managing a portfolio that included positions in Tesla, Apple, Google, and dozens of other companies, then drive my dented Honda Civic to meet with small business clients who paid me $50 to balance their books. In the afternoon, I might research emerging cryptocurrency projects or analyze real estate markets for potential investments, then cook dinner with ingredients from the discount grocery store and watch Netflix on my modest television. I lived like someone making $40,000 a year while actually earning closer to $2 million annually. The contrast was deliberate and strategic. I wanted to see who would value Linda Thompson the person versus Linda Thompson the millionaire. I wanted to know if my own son's love and respect were conditional on my economic status. Unfortunately, I was beginning to get my answer, and it wasn't the one I'd hoped for. Kevin's embarrassment about my lifestyle had become increasingly obvious at family gatherings and social events. He would introduce me vaguely as someone who worked in finance, rather than admitting I was a bookkeeper. He would steer conversations away from topics that might reveal our modest background. He would position himself physically between me and his colleagues, as if my presence might somehow diminish his professional image. The morning of our fateful encounter, I had just closed a cryptocurrency trade that netted me $47,000 in profit, more than Kevin's monthly salary, when he called to ask if I needed a ride to my doctor's appointment. "I can pick you up, but I have to be back at the office by 3 for a meeting with some important clients," he'd said, his tone suggesting that giving his mother a ride was an inconvenience he was grudgingly willing to endure. I accepted the ride gratefully, not because I needed it. I could have easily called an Uber or even bought a new car that afternoon if I'd wanted to, but because I cherished any opportunity to spend time with my son, even when his attitude disappointed me. As I locked my apartment and walked to Kevin's BMW, I had no idea that the next hour would finally force me to reveal the truth about who I really was and what I had accomplished while he was busy being embarrassed by his own mother. The tension in Kevin's BMW was palpable from the moment I got in the car. He was dressed in what I had come to recognize as his important meeting outfit: a crisp button-down shirt, dark jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and those expensive sneakers that somehow managed to look both casual and professional. His hair was perfectly styled, his cologne subtle but expensive, and his entire appearance crafted to project success and sophistication. I, on the other hand, was wearing my usual uniform of comfortable jeans, a simple cotton sweater, and practical walking shoes. My hair was pulled back in a basic ponytail. I wore no makeup except for a little lip balm, and I carried the same worn leather purse I'd been using for 3 years. To anyone looking at us, we probably appeared to be exactly what Kevin feared we looked like: a successful young professional reluctantly giving his struggling mother a ride. "Thanks for picking me up, honey," I said as I buckled my seatbelt. "I know you're busy." Kevin nodded tersely, already pulling into traffic with the kind of aggressive driving that had become characteristic of his personality. "The appointment shouldn't take long, right? I really need to be back by 3. Of course. Dr. Martinez said it would just be a routine checkup, 30 minutes at most. We drove in uncomfortable silence for several blocks, the radio playing softly while Kevin navigated the San Francisco traffic with obvious impatience. I could feel him glancing at me periodically, and there was something in his expression that suggested he was working up to saying something unpleasant. "Mom," he finally said, his tone carefully controlled, "I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't take it the wrong way." "What is it?" Kevin took a deep breath. "After your appointment, I'm supposed to meet some clients at that new coffee place near my office. It's a really important meeting. These guys could bring in millions in revenue for the company. Would it be okay if you just took an Uber home? I know it's an extra expense, but I could give you the money for it." I looked at my son's profile as he focused on driving, noting the tension in his jaw and the way he was gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "Kevin, if you're worried about time, I can definitely take an Uber, but why can't I just wait in the car or grab a coffee somewhere nearby?" "It's not about time," Kevin said quickly, then seemed to realize his mistake. "I mean, it is about time, but it's also, these clients are from New York. They're sophisticated, successful people who are used to a certain environment." The word environment hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I understood immediately what he was trying to say, but I wanted to hear him actually say it. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by environment, Kevin." My son's face flushed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Mom, you know I love you, but sometimes you don't realize how you present yourself. These people are going to judge everything about this meeting, including who they see me associating with. And you're concerned that being seen with your mother would reflect poorly on you?" "That's not what I'm saying," Kevin protested, though his tone suggested that was exactly what he was saying. "I'm just saying that in business, image matters. People make assumptions based on appearances, and I can't afford to give these clients the wrong impression." We had arrived at the medical building, and Kevin pulled into a parking space with more force than necessary. As I gathered my purse and prepared to get out, I decided to push the conversation a little further. "Kevin, what kind of wrong impression do you think I would give?" My son turned to face me directly for the first time during the ride, and what I saw in his expression broke my heart. There was embarrassment, frustration, and something that looked uncomfortably like shame. "Mom, look at yourself. Look at your car. Look at your clothes. Look at the way you present yourself to the world. These clients are going to see you and think I come from a certain kind of background. They're going to make assumptions about my education, my sophistication, my potential." "What kind of assumptions, specifically?" Kevin's frustration was building. "They're going to think I'm some kid from the wrong side of the tracks who got lucky with a tech job. They're going to wonder if I really belong in their world. They're going to question whether I have the background and breeding to handle their level of business." Background and breeding. Those words revealed everything I needed to know about how fundamentally my son's values had changed. The young man I had raised to judge people by their character rather than their bank account was now worried about breeding, like he was applying to join a country club. And you think my appearance would reinforce those assumptions? Yes, Kevin said bluntly. I do. I think if these clients see me with someone who looks like they're struggling financially, they're going to assume that I'm not as successful or sophisticated as I need them to believe I am. I sat in the passenger seat of my son's BMW, looking at this young man who had once been proud to introduce me to his friends, who had once bragged about his mother's work ethic and determination. Now he was embarrassed by the very struggles that had shaped both of our characters. Kevin, do you remember when you were in high school and you wanted those expensive basketball shoes that all your friends had? Mom, this isn't the time for a trip down memory lane. I told you that we couldn't afford them, but if you really wanted them, you could get a part-time job and save up to buy them yourself. Do you remember what you said to me? Kevin's jaw tightened. No, I don't remember. You said that shoes don't make the player. You said that anyone who judged you based on your sneakers wasn't worth impressing. You said you'd rather be respected for your character than admired for your accessories. That was different. I was a kid then. Was it different? Or have you just decided that character doesn't matter as much as image? Kevin checked his phone and made an exaggerated show of noting the time. Mom, we really need to wrap this up. Your appointment is in 5 minutes and I need to get back to the office. But I wasn't finished with this conversation. Kevin, I need you to listen to me carefully. The mother who raised you, who worked 3 jobs to put you through college, who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities, that woman hasn't changed. I'm the same person I've always been. If you're embarrassed by me now, when exactly did that embarrassment start? I'm not embarrassed by you, Kevin insisted, but his tone lacked conviction. I'm just trying to be practical about business relationships. You're trying to hide where you come from because you think it makes you look bad. Maybe I am, Kevin snapped, his composure finally cracking. Maybe I don't want to spend my whole life being defined by growing up poor. Maybe I want to be seen as someone who belongs in the world I'm trying to build. And you think I don't belong in that world? Kevin looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. Mom, I think you belong wherever you want to belong. But I also think that if you want to be part of my professional life, you need to understand that there are certain expectations. What kind of expectations? Expectations about how successful people present themselves, how they dress, how they speak, what kind of car they drive, where they live. I know it sounds shallow, but that's the reality of the business world. I nodded slowly, processing not just his words, but the underlying assumptions that had led him to this moment. So, if I wanted to be part of your professional life, I would need to change how I present myself. Yes, Kevin said, relief evident in his voice that I was finally understanding his point. You'd need to invest in yourself, get some nicer clothes, maybe lease a better car, present yourself as someone who's successful rather than someone who's just getting by. And if I can't afford those improvements, Kevin reached for his wallet. Mom, I'd be happy to help you. We could call it a loan if that makes you feel better. I could advance you some money to upgrade your wardrobe, maybe help with a down payment on a decent car. I make good money now. I can afford to invest in both of our futures. The condescension in his offer was breathtaking. My son, who was living paycheck to maintain his own image, was offering to loan me money to become someone he wouldn't be embarrassed to be seen with. The same son whose education I had funded, whose character I had shaped, whose values I had tried to instill. That's very generous of you, Kevin, I said quietly. But what if I said no? What if I said I was happy with my car and my clothes and my life exactly as they are? Kevin's expression hardened. Then I guess you'd be choosing to limit your involvement in my professional life. You mean you'd be choosing to limit my involvement in your professional life? Mom, I can't force you to understand how the business world works, but I also can't pretend that image doesn't matter when it absolutely does. I reached for the door handle, preparing to get out for my appointment. Kevin, let me ask you one more question. If one of your clients met me and judged you negatively based on my appearance, what would that tell you about the kind of person they are? It would tell me they're human, Kevin replied without hesitation. Everyone makes assumptions based on appearances. That's not a character flaw. That's just reality. And you're comfortable building business relationships with people who would think less of you because your mother doesn't look wealthy enough? I'm comfortable being realistic about how the world works, instead of pretending that everyone judges people solely on their character. I got out of the car and leaned down to speak through the open window. I'll take an Uber home, Kevin. Enjoy your meeting with the sophisticated clients. Mom, don't be dramatic about this. We can talk more later. We definitely will, I agreed. But Kevin, I think it's time you learned something important about making assumptions based on appearances. As I walked toward the medical building, I could hear Kevin calling after me, but I didn't turn around. I had spent 3 years living modestly while building wealth specifically to test the people around me, and my own son had just failed that test spectacularly. It was time for Kevin to learn that the mother he was embarrassed to be seen with was actually the most successful person he knew, and that he was about to lose access to opportunities he couldn't even imagine. As I watched Kevin drive away in his BMW, leaving me standing on the sidewalk outside the medical building, I felt something shift inside me that I hadn't experienced in 3 years. The careful control I had maintained over my emotions. The patience I had shown while watching my son transform into someone I barely recognized. The hope that he would eventually remember the values I had tried to teach him. All of it crystallized into a cold, clear determination. Kevin wanted to be embarrassed by his mother? Fine. He wanted to judge people based on their appearance and their possessions? Perfect. He wanted to limit my involvement in his professional life because I didn't look successful enough? Excellent. It was time for my son to learn exactly how expensive his assumptions were going to be. I pulled out my phone and canceled my doctor's appointment, then called an Uber to take me not home to Oakland, but to the Mercedes-Benz dealership in downtown San Francisco. While I waited for the car, I opened my investment app and checked my current portfolio value, $8.3 million and growing. More than enough to make a statement that Kevin would never forget. The Uber driver, a friendly older man named Carlos, made pleasant conversation during the drive. Beautiful day, isn't it? Are you car shopping? Something like that, I replied, already formulating my plan. I'm looking for something that makes a statement. Well, Mercedes definitely makes a statement. My daughter works at a tech company, says all her colleagues drive either BMW or Mercedes. Status symbols, you know. Status symbols. Exactly what Kevin and Jessica believed mattered most in determining someone's worth. Well, I was about to give them a status symbol they wouldn't forget. The Mercedes dealership was everything I expected. Gleaming showroom floors, impeccably dressed salespeople, and cars that cost more than most people's houses. I had avoided places like this for 3 years, maintaining my modest lifestyle while my investment portfolio grew exponentially. But today, I was ready to break character in the most dramatic way possible. A young salesman named Derek approached me with the kind of polite smile that salespeople reserve for customers they're not quite sure can afford to be there. I was still wearing my simple jeans and sweater, carrying my worn purse, and probably looked exactly like someone who had wandered into the wrong dealership. "Good afternoon," Derek said pleasantly. "Are you looking for anything specific today?" "I want your most expensive car," I said without preamble. "Whatever costs the most money on this lot, I want to see it." Derek's smile faltered slightly. "Well, we have several premium models. Perhaps I could show you some of our certified pre-owned vehicles. They offer excellent value, and—" "I don't want value," I interrupted. "I want expensive. I want the kind of car that costs more than most people make in several years. I want something that will make everyone who sees it understand exactly how much money I have." "Okay," Derek said slowly, clearly unsure how to handle this request from someone who looked like she should be shopping for a used Honda. "Our most expensive vehicle on the lot right now is a Mercedes-AMG S63. It's $185,000, fully loaded." "Perfect. I'll take it." Derek blinked. Would you like to see it first? Take a test drive? Discuss financing options?" "I don't need financing. I'll pay cash. But yes, I'd like to see it." The car was magnificent, a gleaming black sedan with every luxury feature imaginable. Leather interior that probably cost more than Kevin's monthly rent. Technology that looked like something from a spaceship, and an engine that could outperform most sports cars. It was exactly the kind of vehicle that screamed wealth and success. "This is beautiful," I said, running my hand along the pristine exterior. "But I want to make one modification." "What kind of modification?" Derek asked, still looking uncertain about whether this sale was real. "I want custom license plates. Can you arrange that?" "Of course. What would you like them to say?" I smiled for the first time that day. "Mom, CEO." While Derek processed the paperwork and arranged for the custom plates, I called my financial advisor to transfer the funds. Then I called Jessica's company, Lux Brand Consulting, and made an appointment for the following week. If Kevin wanted to play games about status and image, I was going to play those games better than he could imagine. "Ms. Thompson," Derek said, returning with a stack of papers, "I have to ask, what do you do for a living?" "I'm in investments," I replied, which was technically true. "I do quite well." The process of buying a $185,000 car in cash took surprisingly little time once Derek realized I was serious. Within 2 hours, I was sitting behind the wheel of a vehicle that cost more than Kevin's annual salary, driving toward San Francisco with a plan that would change our relationship forever. But first, I had some other preparations to make. My next stop was Nordstrom, where I spent the remainder of the afternoon selecting a wardrobe that would match my new car. Not because I cared about expensive clothes, but because I wanted Kevin to understand that every assumption he had made about my life was wrong. The personal shopper, a stylish woman named Vanessa, was initially puzzled by my request. "You want an entire professional wardrobe? For what kind of work environment?" "Corporate consulting," I said. "I need to look like someone who's worth 8 figures. Vanessa's eyes widened. 8 figures? Give or take a few million. By the end of our session, I had acquired suits that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, shoes that were individually more expensive than my old monthly grocery budget, and accessories that would have seemed ridiculous to me just that morning. But every purchase was strategic, designed to create an image that would force Kevin to confront his own prejudices and assumptions. The final stop of my transformation day was a high-end salon in Union Square, where I got my hair professionally styled and makeup done by an artist who specialized in executive presence. The woman looking back at me in the mirror was still recognizably Linda Thompson, But she was a version of Linda Thompson who looked like she belonged in boardrooms and first-class lounges. As I drove my new Mercedes back to Oakland that evening, I thought about the conversation I would need to have with Kevin. Not the conversation where I revealed my wealth. That would come later, in a much more public and dramatic way. Tonight, I needed to plant the seeds of doubt about his assumptions and behavior. Kevin called just as I was parking my new car in the garage I had rented specifically for this moment. "Mom, how did your appointment go? I tried calling earlier, but it went straight to voicemail." "The appointment went fine, Kevin. I canceled it, actually." "You canceled it? Why?" "I decided I had more important things to do today, like thinking about our conversation in the car." There was a pause. "Mom, I hope you're not upset about that. I was just trying to be honest about how business works." "I'm not upset, Kevin. I'm grateful. You helped me understand something important about how you see me and how you see the world." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you opened my eyes to the fact that appearance and status matter more to you than character and integrity. That's valuable information." "Mom, that's not fair. Of course, character matters, but not as much as image. Not as much as being seen with the right kind of people who drive the right kind of cars and wear the right kind of clothes." "Why are you making this sound so black and white?" "Because that's how you presented it to me, Kevin. You told me that I would need to change how I look and what I drive if I wanted to be part of your professional life. You offered to loan me money to become someone you wouldn't be embarrassed by. Those weren't subtle suggestions. They were clear statements about your values." Kevin sighed heavily. "Mom, I'm trying to build something here. I'm trying to create opportunities for both of us. Sometimes that requires making practical decisions about presentation." "I understand completely," I said, my voice calm and steady. "And I've made some practical decisions of my own." "What kind of decisions?" "The kind that will help you understand exactly who your mother really is and what she's actually accomplished while you were busy being embarrassed by her." "What does that mean?" "It means that next week I'm going to pay you a visit at your office. And Kevin, I think you're going to be very surprised by what your colleagues think when they meet me." "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." "Oh, I think it's an excellent idea. In fact, I think it's exactly what both of us need." "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to show you what assumptions cost, Kevin. I'm planning to demonstrate the difference between actual success and the appearance of success. And I'm planning to teach you the most expensive lesson of your life about judging people by their appearance." "You're scaring me a little." "Good," I replied. "Maybe it's time you learned to be a little scared of underestimating people." I hung up the phone and walked into my modest apartment, where I spent the evening researching Kevin's company, his colleagues, and his upcoming projects. If he wanted to play games about status and success, I was going to show him what real power looked like. By the time I went to bed that night, I had formulated a plan that would not only humble my son, but potentially change the trajectory of his entire career. Kevin thought he understood how the business world worked, but he was about to discover that his mother understood it better than he could imagine. The quiet bookkeeper he was embarrassed to be seen with was about to become the most influential person in his professional life, and he had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks after Kevin left me standing on that San Francisco sidewalk, I was ready to make my entrance. I had spent those weeks carefully orchestrating what would become the most memorable day of my son's professional life. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered, and every element designed to deliver maximum impact. The morning started at 6 a.m. in my modest Oakland apartment, but this time I wasn't wearing jeans and a sweater. I had selected one of the designer suits from my Nordstrom shopping spree, a charcoal gray Armani that fit perfectly and probably cost more than Kevin spent on rent each month. My hair had been professionally styled the day before, my makeup was flawless, and I wore jewelry that was elegant without being ostentatious. But the real statement was waiting in my garage, the black Mercedes AMG S63 with its custom Mom CEO license plates, detailed to perfection and ready to announce my arrival in the most dramatic way possible. I had done my research thoroughly. Kevin's company, TechFlow Solutions, was expecting a visit from potential investors that morning, a group that was considering a substantial funding round that could make or break several careers at the company. What Kevin didn't know was that I had arranged to be one of those potential investors. My appointment with the company's leadership team was scheduled for 10 a.m., exactly 30 minutes before Kevin's regular Tuesday morning team meeting. The timing was deliberate. I wanted my presence to be known throughout the office before Kevin even realized I was there. At 9:45 a.m., I pulled my Mercedes into the visitor parking space directly in front of TechFlow's glass office building. The car's arrival caused immediate attention from employees entering the building, several of whom I could see stopping to admire the vehicle and speculate about which important visitor had arrived. I took a moment to check my appearance in the rearview mirror, then stepped out of the car with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly how much power you wield. The transformation was complete. The modest bookkeeper from Oakland had been replaced by a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of Fortune magazine. The building's lobby was exactly what I expected from a successful tech company, all glass and steel and modern art, designed to impress visitors and project innovation. The receptionist, a young woman who couldn't have been much older than Kevin, looked up as I approached her desk. "Good morning," she said, with professional courtesy. "How can I help you?" "Linda Thompson to see Richard Martinez about the Series B investment opportunity," I replied, handing her a business card that simply read, L. Thompson, Private Investments, with a phone number and email address. "Of course, Ms. Thompson. Mr. Martinez is expecting you. Would you like coffee or water while you wait?" "Coffee would be lovely, thank you." As I settled into one of the lobby's expensive leather chairs, I could see employees throughout the ground floor glancing in my direction. My appearance was clearly generating curiosity. Here was a woman who obviously had serious money, waiting to meet with the company's CEO about a major investment. Richard Martinez appeared exactly on time, a well-dressed man in his 50s who had the kind of polished demeanor that comes from years of courting investors. "Ms. Thompson, Richard Martinez, CEO of TechFlow. Thank you so much for coming in today." "Thank you for making time to meet with me, Mr. Martinez. I've been following your company's progress with great interest." Richard's assistant, a sharp-looking woman named Patricia, joined us as we headed toward the elevator. "We're very excited to show you what we're building here," she said. "Your investment profile suggests you'd be an excellent fit for our current funding round." What they didn't know was that my investment profile was entirely real. Over the past 3 weeks, I had worked with a legitimate investment firm to structure myself as an accredited investor with the kind of portfolio that would make TechFlow's leadership very interested in my money. The executive conference room was on the 15th floor, with panoramic views of San Francisco and furnishings that suggested serious business. Richard had assembled his core team for the presentation: his CTO, his head of sales, his marketing director, and his VP of operations. "Before we begin," Richard said, as we settled around the conference table, "I'm curious about how you heard about TechFlow." We don't typically get inquiries from investors of your caliber without some kind of introduction. I smiled. I have a son who works here, Kevin Thompson. He's mentioned what an innovative company this is, and when I started looking for tech investments, TechFlow seemed like an obvious choice to investigate. The room went very quiet. Richard glanced at his colleagues with an expression that suggested Kevin had never mentioned having a mother who was a major investor. Kevin Thompson, Richard repeated slowly. In our engineering department? That's right. I'm very proud of the work he's doing here. Richard's marketing director, a woman named Sarah, leaned forward with obvious interest. Ms. Thompson, I have to ask, does Kevin know you're here today? Not yet, I replied. I wanted to evaluate the investment opportunity independently before involving family dynamics. I'm sure you understand. What followed was 90 minutes of the most professional presentation I had ever received. Richard's team walked me through their technology, their market position, their growth projections, and their funding needs with the kind of detail and attention that's reserved for serious investors. And I was a serious investor. My questions were informed, my analysis was sophisticated, and my obvious wealth was making everyone in the room very eager to impress me. By the end of the presentation, it was clear that TechFlow would very much like to have my money. Ms. Thompson, Richard said as we concluded, I have to say, this has been one of the most productive investor meetings we've had. Your insights into market positioning are particularly valuable. Thank you. I've spent considerable time studying emerging technologies and their commercial applications. If you don't mind me asking, Sarah interjected, what's your background? Your analysis suggests serious experience in tech investing. I started in accounting and bookkeeping, I said with a slight smile. But I've diversified into various investment areas over the past few years. It's been quite profitable. Richard checked his watch. Ms. Thompson, our engineering team has their weekly meeting in a few minutes. Since Kevin is your son, would you like to stop by and say hello? I'm sure he'd be surprised to see you here. That sounds perfect, I agreed. I think Kevin will indeed be very surprised. As we walked toward the elevator, Patricia was already on her phone, clearly excited about the prospect of a major new investor. Richard, if we can close Ms. Thompson, this round will be oversubscribed by at least 20%. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Richard cautioned, but his tone suggested he was equally optimistic. The engineering department occupied most of the 8th floor, with an open floor plan that allowed for collaboration and the kind of creative chaos that tech companies love to promote. Kevin's desk was near the back, and I could see him through the glass walls of the conference room where his team was gathering for their meeting. Kevin looks just like you, Patricia observed as we approached. Same eyes, same facial structure? Yes, people have always said we look alike, I agreed. Richard knocked on the conference room door and gestured for Kevin to come out. I watched my son's face as he looked up, saw his CEO beckoning, and started walking toward us with the slightly nervous expression that employees get when the boss wants to talk. Kevin stepped out of the conference room and looked at Richard expectantly. You wanted to see me? Kevin, I'd like you to meet someone, Richard said with obvious pleasure. This is Linda Thompson. She's a potential investor we've been meeting with this morning. Kevin turned to look at me, and I will never forget the expression on his face. First confusion, then recognition, then absolute shock as he processed what he was seeing. His mother, who he had left standing on a sidewalk 3 weeks ago because she was too embarrassing to be seen with, was standing in his office wearing a designer suit and being introduced as a major investor. Mom? Kevin's voice was barely above a whisper. Hello, Kevin, I said calmly. Surprise. Richard looked between us with growing confusion. You two know each other? Kevin is my son, I explained pleasantly. I mentioned that earlier. Your son? Richard's voice climbed an octave. Kevin, you never mentioned that your mother was an investor. Kevin was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. This isn't... Kevin seems a bit surprised to see me here, I observed. We haven't talked much lately about my work. By now, Kevin's colleagues had noticed the commotion and were gathering near the conference room door. Jessica had appeared from somewhere and was standing behind Kevin, her mouth slightly open as she took in my transformation. Miss Thompson, Sarah said, clearly trying to process this family connection. When you said you were in investments, we had no idea you were talking about this level of activity. I prefer to be modest about my success, I replied, though Kevin has been encouraging me to be more visible in my professional life. Kevin found his voice. Mom, what are you doing here? I'm exploring an investment opportunity, Kevin. TechFlow seems like a very promising company. Richard has been giving me an excellent presentation about your growth potential. Richard was beginning to understand that there was more to this story. Kevin, did you know your mother was interested in investing in tech companies? No, sir. I had no idea. Really? I said with surprise. Kevin, just a few weeks ago you were telling me about how important it is to project success and associate with successful people. I thought you'd be pleased to see me taking your advice. Jessica stepped forward, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her manicured hands. Mrs. Thompson, I'm Jessica, Kevin's girlfriend. We met briefly at... Of course, Jessica. How nice to see you again. Kevin has told me so much about your work in luxury brand consulting. Thank you. I have to say, you look different today. Do I? Kevin mentioned that presentation matters in the business world, so I decided to make some adjustments to my professional image. The crowd of Kevin's colleagues was growing, and I could see phones being discreetly pulled out to photograph or text about the situation. Word was clearly spreading throughout the office that Kevin Thompson's mother was not who anyone thought she was. Richard, sensing an opportunity, jumped back into the conversation. Ms. Thompson, given your family connection to TechFlow, I hope this makes our company even more attractive as an investment opportunity. Actually, I said, checking my watch, it raises some interesting questions. Kevin, could we talk privately for a moment? I'd love to get your perspective on the company culture here. Kevin nodded mutely and led me toward an empty office. As we walked away, I could hear Richard talking excitedly to his team about the unexpected family connection and what it might mean for their funding round. Once we were alone, Kevin closed the door and turned to face me with an expression that combined confusion, embarrassment, and dawning realization. Mom, what the hell is going on? I smiled at my son, the same young man who had been too embarrassed to be seen with me just 3 weeks earlier. Kevin, I think it's time you learned exactly who your mother really is. The private office where Kevin and I had our conversation was small, but modern, with the kind of glass walls that provided visual privacy while still allowing the rest of the office to see that something significant was happening. As I watched my son's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and growing understanding, I realized that this moment would define our relationship for years to come. Mom, Kevin said quietly, sinking into one of the office chairs, I need you to explain what's happening here. 3 weeks ago, you were driving a beat-up Honda and worried about paying for an Uber. Today you're wearing a suit that probably costs more than my monthly rent and talking to my CEO about investing in the company. None of this makes sense. I took the chair across from him, maintaining the calm demeanor that had carried me through the morning's performance. "Kevin, everything makes perfect sense. You just never bothered to ask the right questions." "What questions should I have asked?" "You could have asked how a freelance bookkeeper could afford to live in the Bay Area for 3 years without struggling. You could have asked how I managed to support your college education while maintaining a comfortable lifestyle. You could have asked why I never seemed stressed about money despite supposedly earning a modest income." Kevin's face was pale. "Are you saying you've been lying to me about your financial situation?" "I'm saying I've been living modestly while building wealth, and you assumed that modest living meant modest means. There's a difference." "How much wealth are we talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed him my investment portfolio balance. Kevin stared at the screen for a long moment, his eyes widening as he processed the number of zeros. $8.7 million, he whispered. "As of this morning. It fluctuates daily based on market conditions. How is this possible? How did you make this kind of money?" "Cryptocurrency investments, stock trading, real estate, and some very lucky timing during the pandemic market crash. I started with $500 3 years ago and built it into this through research, discipline, and careful risk management." Kevin leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. 3 years? You've been a millionaire for 3 years and never told me." "Kevin, I've been testing everyone around me for 3 years to see who would value Linda Thompson the person versus Linda Thompson the millionaire. Unfortunately, you failed that test spectacularly." "What do you mean I failed?" "I mean that the moment you achieved a little success, you became embarrassed by the woman who raised you. You started judging me based on my appearance, my car, my clothes. You offered to loan me money to become someone you wouldn't be ashamed to be seen with." Kevin's voice was defensive. "I was trying to help you improve your situation." "Kevin, my situation didn't need improving. My values didn't need upgrading. My character didn't need enhancement. The only thing that needed changing was your attitude toward the people you claim to love." There was a knock on the office door, and Richard Martinez peered in. "Sorry to interrupt, but Miss Thompson, we have a few more questions about the investment timeline if you have a moment." "Of course," I replied, standing up. "Kevin, we'll continue this conversation later. Right now, I have some business to attend to." As I left Kevin sitting alone in that office, I could see him through the glass walls, staring at his hands and clearly trying to process everything he'd learned. The rest of the office was buzzing with energy. Word had spread quickly that Kevin Thompson's mother was a major investor who might be funding their next growth phase. The remainder of my visit to TechFlow was professionally productive and personally satisfying. Richard's team was eager to accommodate my questions, and my obvious wealth had transformed me from Kevin's embarrassing mother into one of the most important people who'd ever visited their office. "Ms. Thompson," Richard said as we concluded our second round of meetings, "I have to ask, does this family connection make you more or less likely to invest in TechFlow?" "It depends," I replied honestly. "I never mix family and business unless I'm confident that both will benefit. I'll need to evaluate whether Kevin's colleagues treat him differently now that they know about my financial situation." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if Kevin suddenly becomes more popular or respected simply because his mother has money, that tells me something troubling about your company culture. Merit should be based on performance, not family connections." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "That's a very wise perspective." Over the following weeks, I watched Kevin navigate the aftermath of my revelation with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. His colleagues' reactions were exactly what I had expected. Some became noticeably friendlier, others seemed intimidated, and a few clearly resented him for what they perceived as hidden advantages. Jessica's response was the most dramatic. Within days of learning about my wealth, she had completely changed her attitude toward both Kevin and me. The woman who had once offered to take me shopping at discount stores was suddenly eager to be my friend, suggesting expensive restaurants where we could get to know each other better and asking detailed questions about my investment strategies. "Kevin is so lucky to have such a successful mother," she gushed during one particularly transparent phone call. "I'd love to learn more about your approach to building wealth." Kevin, to his credit, was horrified by Jessica's obvious gold-digging behavior. "Mom, I'm starting to see Jessica differently," he admitted during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "The way she's treating you now compared to how she treated you before. It's really eye-opening." "What does that tell you about her character, Kevin?" "It tells me she values money more than people." "And what does it tell you about making assumptions based on appearances?" Kevin was quiet for a long moment. "Tells me I was wrong about a lot of things." Our relationship began to heal slowly, but the process required Kevin to confront some uncomfortable truths about his own behavior and values. He had to acknowledge that his embarrassment about my appearance had been based on shallow judgments about wealth and status. He had to admit that his offer to loan me money had been condescending and presumptuous. Most painfully, he had to recognize that he had become the kind of person who judged others based on their possessions rather than their character. "Mom, I owe you an apology," Kevin said during one of our conversations about 6 weeks after my office visit. "Not just for that day in the car, but for the way I've been treating you for months. I became someone I don't like, and I hurt the person who means the most to me." "What changed you?" "Kevin, success went to my head. I started believing that making good money made me a better person. I started thinking that appearances mattered more than substance. I let other people's opinions influence how I saw my own family." "And what have you learned from this experience?" Kevin thought carefully before answering. "I've learned that real wealth isn't about what you drive or what you wear. It's about what you build when nobody's watching. I've learned that judging people based on their appearance is not only wrong but also incredibly expensive. I almost lost the most important relationship in my life because I was embarrassed by someone who was actually more successful than I could ever hope to be." The most profound change in Kevin came in how he treated other people. He began showing respect to service workers, speaking kindly to colleagues regardless of their position, and judging people based on their character rather than their status symbols. The arrogance that had been building over the years was replaced by genuine humility. "I keep thinking about all the people I dismissed because they didn't look successful enough," Kevin told me. "How many opportunities did I miss? How many good people did I overlook because I was focused on the wrong things?" My decision about investing in TechFlow ultimately had nothing to do with Kevin's employment there. I chose to invest $2 million in their Series B round because their technology was solid, their leadership was competent, and their growth projections were realistic. But I made it clear that my investment was not about helping my son's career. It was about growing my portfolio. "Kevin, I want you to understand something important," I told him after the investment was finalized. "I didn't invest in TechFlow to help you. I invested because it's a good business decision. Your success or failure at that company will be based on your own merit, not on your mother's money." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Kevin replied, and I could tell he meant it. The most unexpected outcome of this entire experience was how it changed my own approach to wealth and lifestyle. After 3 years of deliberately living modestly, I realized that I had been hiding not just from Kevin, but from myself. I began spending money on things that brought me joy: travel, art, experiences that enriched my life without being ostentatious. I bought a beautiful house in the Oakland Hills, not to impress anyone, but because I wanted to live somewhere that reflected my success and hard work. I continued driving the Mercedes because I enjoyed it, but I also kept the Honda Civic as a reminder of where I'd come from. Kevin and Jessica's relationship ended within 2 months of my office visit. Jessica's obvious interest in my money, rather than Kevin's character, became impossible to ignore. And Kevin finally understood the difference between someone who loved him and someone who loved what she thought he could provide. "I'm actually grateful that Jessica showed her true colors," Kevin told me. "It helped me understand what I really want in a partner. Someone who values substance over status, someone who would love me whether I was rich or poor." A year later, Kevin started dating Amy, a teacher who made a fraction of his income but who shared his values and appreciated his character. When I met Amy for the first time, she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, driving a 10-year-old car, and she was one of the most impressive people I'd ever encountered. "Your mother is amazing," Amy told Kevin after our first dinner together. "The way she built her success while raising you alone, the way she stayed grounded despite her wealth, she's exactly the kind of person I hope to become." That comment made me realize that my experiment in modest living had succeeded beyond my original goals. I hadn't just tested the people around me. I had preserved the values and character that made success meaningful. Today, Kevin and I have a stronger relationship than we've ever had. He respects my success without being intimidated by it, and I respect his independence without trying to influence his career with my money. We've both learned that real wealth is measured not by what you have, but by who you are when you have it. The most important lesson from this experience is that assumptions are always expensive, but they're especially costly when they damage relationships with people you love. Kevin learned that judging people by their appearance can cause you to underestimate allies and overvalue superficial qualities. I learned that hiding your authentic self, even for good reasons, can prevent the people you love from truly knowing and appreciating you. My advice to anyone who has achieved success is simple: stay humble, treat everyone with respect, and remember that your worth as a person has nothing to do with your net worth. And to anyone who feels underestimated or overlooked, don't let other people's assumptions define your value. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is simply to let your success speak for itself. Kevin's embarrassment about his unsuccessful mother cost him months of authentic relationship and nearly cost him the most important connection in his life. But it also taught him a lesson worth far more than money: that character matters more than appearance, that love matters more than status, and that real success is measured by how you treat people, not by how people perceive you. Sometimes the people who look the most ordinary are hiding the most extraordinary achievements. And sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to show them exactly how expensive their assumptions really are.